And so as a review of the chain of events in the book of Genesis in general. So God creates Adam and Eve. He creates all things good. They fall into sin. And then immediately after the fall into sin, the next thing we read about is Cain and Abel, where Cain is jealous of Abel and does not love the Lord and serve him with gladness, but instead only out of obligation. And so the Lord rejects his offering. And then Cain murders Abel. And the Lord puts his mark on Cain. But we already see that there's a division happening among people. There's those who serve the Lord and those who don't. And so by Genesis 9, what do we find? Or Genesis 6, sorry. How does the account of Moses start? Or, I almost said Jonah. Noah. God looked down on men and saw what?
Only evil all the time.
Only evil all the time. And I've observed recently that when I read the Old Testament history, in a lot of ways, it's the Lord demonstrating for us all the ways that don't work. So God left mankind to themselves with minimum interference. And what happened? How many righteous people were left on the earth? People who trusted in the Lord. One family, 8. And then if you look at how Ham and his son Canaan, after the return, well, maybe you want to say 6. But 8 of them were preserved. And so that doesn't work. He can't leave mankind on their own. There will be a few who hear the word of the Lord and trust in him. Enoch walked with God. Moses was blameless in his generation. They heard the promise passed down from Adam through the generations, and they believed and they tried to live that promise. But most, their thoughts were only evil all the time. So how does God adjust that now? He intervenes in the flood and destroys the world and wipes it clean and purifies it and saves the promise of a Savior through that flood. We are saved through water, not destroyed by water. But then he chooses Abraham. And he makes a promise to him. And he says, in this person, in these people, I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to keep my promises. And so instead of leaving mankind to its own devices, he says, this is going to be my special people. These are my, and they are going to carry my promise. And so he calls Abraham, and Abraham goes to the land where he was never and did not know. And Abraham lives as a foreigner there, but he lives by faith, trusting what? And what was that promise? There's multiple parts.
You will have a son.
I have a son. That kind of comes later. In fact, he makes a bigger promise before you will have a son, doesn't he?
Your descendants will be
Yeah,
the dust of the...
You'll be the father of many nations, so much so that every time you look up at the night sky, you're seeing the number of your descendants. Every step you take with every puff of dust, you're remembering all the descendants that you're going to have. And he preserves Abraham, and Abraham also realizes this promise isn't fulfilled yet. I'm a stranger in a strange land. When he saves the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they want to pay him, what's he say? No. because I won't have anyone say that I made Abraham rich. Instead, I will show that the Lord is the one who blesses me. And so Abraham goes through all of this. What happened with Ishmael when Ishmael grew up? It's kind of a smaller group. He took wives from among the Canaanites, and they quickly led him astray. So now Abraham is getting very old. Sarah has died. Abraham buys a tomb, the only land he buys in all of Canaan, as a statement that no matter what happens, this is where his descendants will be. So even the buying of the tomb is a statement of faith. But now, there's a problem. It's Abraham and Isaac and a bunch of sheep and goats and camels and gold and silver and some servants. And there are no grandbabies. There's no wife, and so what's Abraham going to do? And that's where chapter 24 picks up. Abraham is trusting in the promise of God, and he's looking for that promise to continue through his son Isaac. Can I have someone read verses 1 through 8 for me?
Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant of his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from? Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you, so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there."
All right. So, what are Abraham's chief concerns? Why?
It would be really easy to stay and go, okay, I'm actually around people who are like me and believe what I believe, and
Yeah, he'd be able to return to the life that Abraham had for 75 years. And why specifically? They were syncretists, meaning they worshiped the true God, but they also had some false religious ideas in there as well. We see that with Jacob later on. But they certainly believed in the Lord. And we see that in a few verses. Why doesn't Abraham want Isaac to go back and find a home in Haran again? Among his own people, where you could say he belongs.
Taken away from there, it had promised to give him this new land.
Because God had promised to give him a new land. And they were syncretists. So even though they believe in the Lord, it's not like that was the religious influence. We hear that in Hebrews, that Abraham left behind the gods of his fathers to follow the Lord. And so Abraham's saying, God told me that he will give this land to my descendants. Don't you dare take my son back to that other land where we reject God's promise. Don't even tempt him with that. Okay? What's his other concern? And why that? Probably two reasons. There's an obvious reason why God wouldn't, or why Abraham wouldn't want his son to marry a Canaanite woman. You're going to lead him astray. You know, Elvis knew what he was talking about when he said, a hard-hearted woman and a soft-hearted man been the cause of trouble ever since the world began. It's simply true that women have a way of leading men astray because men don't always follow their brains. And and you can, the examples throughout history are profound. So it says don't do that. A Canaanite woman, and I've seen the way the Canaanites worship, and I saw what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. My son can't intermingle with them. On the other reason, it goes back to the same reason Abraham wouldn't take anything from the Canaanites, and the same reason he didn't want his son going back to Haran. If Isaac marries into the Canaanites, in a way he's doing what Sarah did when she gave Abraham Hagar. I'm going to make God's promise come true. Because what's the easiest way to acquire land in the ancient world? Marry into it. And would Isaac be eligible bachelor number one in all of Canaan? Probably. Unconnected, flocks and herds, successful, smart, no brothers to take his inheritance from him? You bet. Look.
Their father would be sending their daughters.
Yeah, exactly right. So, don't do it. Trust God for the promise. Don't try to find your own way to God's promise. What is the servant's concern? That seem like a reasonable concern?
He doesn't want to fail his masters.
He doesn't want to fail, but also, Abraham said, put your hand under my thigh and swear to me. Makes me think a little bit of Jephthah. You remember in the book of Judges, Jephthah goes out and he wins a great victory, and as he's coming home, or before he goes out and wins the victory, he says, Lord, if you give me this victory, the first thing I see when I return to my household that I will sacrifice to. And I'm sure he was thinking, well, I'm going to pass by all my fields. I'm surely going to see one of my sheep or a donkey or something there that I can sacrifice. But what does he see first but his own daughter? And I am of the opinion that Jephthah sacrifices her. I don't think there's enough in the text to convince me otherwise. Although you could perhaps convince me that maybe he dedicated her some other way to the Lord. Of the opinion that, why would he do that? He's for an oath. And when you promise God something, that isn't something you take back. We struggle with that because we break promises all the time. We are like the least trustworthy people who ever have existed. Now, other peoples around the world have had different terms for their oaths where they would find loopholes and things like that, so you had to be careful. But we don't even bother with keeping our word in America. And certainly, we don't feel like if we swear to God, it makes any difference. They did. And remember, the servant has seen God's power in every way that Abraham has seen God's power. He's not going to mess with the Lord. So if you're going to make me swear this oath, what am I supposed to do if I get there and I'm helpless? Am I supposed to club her upside the head and kidnap her? Could I take your son back there so he can show that he doesn't have a goiter on the side of his face and isn't covered in warts and leprosy or something, that he's a good, marriable young man, that he's not a weirdo? Abraham says, no. We'll just trust that if you go, the Lord will provide the way. And so then the servant does it. He puts his hand under the thigh. Suppose we would consider that across my heart. Put your hand on your heart. Put your hand on the Bible. It's a way of physically signifying that you are taking this oath. I've never read an explanation for why a hand under the thigh, other than maybe it puts you in a supplicant pose, like you would have to kneel down. I don't know. It's what they do. Suppose it's...
So why was Abraham so vehement against his son back to home?
The temptation would be too great to stay, is what I think.
Okay.
And, I mean, Jacob stays for a good part of his life when he's there. It's only until he makes himself a stench in his uncle's nostrils that he has to leave. So the servant does it, and then he takes a bunch of stuff. In fact, 10 camels full of stuff he takes, and travels to Mesopotamia, to Haran, the city of Nahor. Probably a few hundred miles, at 8 to 10 miles a day. So think a couple months of travel to get there. And then when he gets there, it's evening, the time when people go out to draw water, and he prays, Lord God, the God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Here I am, standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let this be the test. The young lady to whom I say, please let down your water jar so that I may drink, will say, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. She will be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. This is how I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Do you have any questions, or does anything strike you as odd about what?
Oh, yeah, don't put your Lord to the test. First thing that came to my
Yeah.
mind.
What do you think of this?
I'm gonna pick one, but she'll be the one who picks.
What do you notice about the test? How much water can 10 candles hold? After walking a few hundred miles.
Sunday.
What do you notice about the test? Why do you say that? Why is this a decent test for a wife? Okay. Okay.
Not afraid of work.
Not afraid of work?
Strong enough to do the work.
Glad to hear it, Shauna. Welcome. And kind, hospitable. You know, in a lot of ways, to have a quick and easy test to see if this is a woman who can serve as the wife in such a household as Abraham's. You could think of worse ways. And in some ways, he's taking it out of his hands. And in another way, he's not saying, Lord, you better do this. But Lord, if such a woman should come out to meet us, then put your hand in this process so that I can know that your will is being done. And so I would see it not as a challenge to God, but as a prayer of trust that God's hand will be with you. What are your thoughts or questions on that?
Well, usually, in all the other, many of the examples, you ask God for a sign.
Okay?
He said, God, here's a sign. Do it.
Find out how she would give you.
Now Gideon asked the Lord to do something too.
Yeah.
And the Lord does not punish him for it, even though his is a very unbelieving heart that's doing that.
It just seemed atypical.
And yet, when you stop to think about it, again, it does also seem like a great place to start. And please let this be the test. So often when we ask God when people say they're going to ask God for a sign, they have in mind something they want to do. And then they're asking God to validate their own desires. When we are, and he also has all the promises of God, doesn't he? God did promise to make Abraham a great nation. God did promise that through Isaac, the promise would carry on. God did promise that they would inherit the land. And right now, the promise is stuck, so to speak. And so, for him to know that he is placing this in God's hands is a way to view this prayer. But we can also say, Lord, I'm going to do my best with what you've given me. Whether I can only think of examples from my own life. I think it would be wrong for me if I received a call to say, Lord, give me a sign, which church should I go to? And then to say, if my goose greets me with gladness this morning, that's a sign that I should stay. But if she's angry at me and skronks angrily when I walk out the door, then I should go. It's true. She did not want to see me this morning. Very angry. Very mad that I was not with you. A regular old hissy fit. So, that would be then I am imposing my will on the Lord in some sort of way, as if I can determine, or I can read the tea leaves, I can throw the dice, I can do something to make God answer me. And I don't think that's a wise way to go about it. But if I accept a call, like when I accepted the call here, and I pray, Lord, may this be your will, and bless me along the way, and give my family this time together as we travel, and fill the congregation with joy. If I pray, and then I will know that your will is being done here. Is that a prayer that is forcing my will on the Lord? I don't think so. Now, dropped Lydia off at St. Croix and barely made it out of Minnesota because the camper kept exploding.
I'm pretty sure if that had happened on the way here, it would have been a little risky.
We did blow a tire in South Dakota on the way here.
He also got locked out of the car 45 minutes away from our house.
My dog, so my minivan had automatic locking doors, but it also had the things that you pull up and down. And when you open, it unlocked, when you put it in park, it didn't unlock all the doors. Just the one, it was a mechanical unlock that when you pulled the indoor handle with the car in park, it popped up that side. And the chains had popped off my camper. And I was just going out to rehook them on. And it was like 95 degrees outside, so the air conditioning was running, so I closed the door. And Otis went up and he put his face on the door and pushed that handle down and locked me out of the car with the car running on the side, on the ramp. So I had gone off and gone across and pulled off on the entrance ramp to the freeway. It's true. Anyway, so yeah, if you go looking for signs, I didn't. Close. Anyway, so we have to be careful putting our signs on the Lord. if God is speaking to us and we can interpret what God is saying by what's happening in our lives.
But it's still not wrong to bring it to the
Correct. And even to say, Lord, bless this and let me know that this is the right decision. Let me know I'm on the right track. He's walking into a situation where he has no idea what he's supposed to do. And so, Rebecca comes out. We find out that she is the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. So, daughter of Bethuel, who is the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother. So kind of the granddaughter-in-law, because it's also by marriage. But she's in the same household. And she's beautiful, and she's marriageable, and he asks her, give me a drink of water just for himself, note. And she says, drink, my Lord. And when she had been done giving him a drink, she said, I will also draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking. She hurried and emptied her water jar into the trough and ran to the well to draw more water, and drew water for all of his camels. The man remained silent and watched her carefully to find out whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. Then when the camels were finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring that weighed half a shekel, and 2 gold bracelets that weighed 10 shekels. 10 shekels is about 4 ounces of gold, so for what that's worth. And he put them on her wrists. Then he said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room to stay in your father's house? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She also said, we have both straw enough to feed and enough room for you to spend the night. The man gave thanks to the Lord. He bowed his head down and worshipped the Lord, saying, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his mercy and faithfulness towards my master. Indeed, the Lord has guided me to the house of my master's relatives. She ran ahead and told them everything. And Laban runs out to see her. You think about Laban as he gets later in life. What do you think grabbed Laban's attention? Pickle. Maybe that's uncharitable to Laban, but just saying. That seems on character with Laban. Where'd you get those, sister?
What I'd like to know, though, is were there, it doesn't say anything about it. It's just the first woman. Were there any others?
So I would assume that she is the first, because it says, before he had even finished speaking, out came Rebekah with her water jar. And then it doesn't mention any other women because they're not important to the history. The Bible almost never mentions anything that's not important to salvation history. Every once in a while you get a detail like the moldy feet that you're like, why? One of the kings had bad feet. Why? It's true, but we just don't know. But the other women aren't mentioned because they're not important to salvation history. Only Rebekah is mentioned. And so Laban runs out and asks the servant, hey, come stay at my house, bring your camels, we'll take care of you. Right this way, good, fine sir. But how's the servant react? The man came into the house and unloaded the camels. Laban gave him straw and feed for the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Food was set before him to eat. But he said, I will not eat until I have delivered my message. And so, I'm not going to read verses 34 through 49. Well, through 48. He tells all the details of everything that has happened from the time Abraham called him in until Rebekah watered his camels. And the Bible often does this, and to our modern way of telling stories or, right, it seems tedious. Note, I'm skipping it. I'm not rereading the history. We just read this. I'm not reading it again. Why do you think the Bible includes so many things twice? Where it says, the Lord said, do this, and it lists all the details, and he did this, and it lists all the details again. Or, he did this, and then he went and he reported, this is what I did, and it records all the details. Why does it do that?
Human nature only 10%. That 10% you want to remember completely.
Yeah, it's emphasis. This is something worth remembering. You get that when Abraham sacrifices Isaac. And I say it that way because that's how Hebrews puts it. That in his mind, Abraham did sacrifice Isaac. He was as good as dead. And he receives him back from the dead. But God gives him the command, and then he basically repeats the whole command in what he gets up to do. And then he goes and does this, and he sees this, and it's all like it repeats and it repeats and it repeats, and it's a way to help us remember the important details. But also to say, in this case, the servant's not embellishing. He's simply reporting, this is what has happened. And then in verse 48, I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who led me in the right way to find the daughter of my master's brother as a wife for his son. Now, if you will show me mercy and faithfulness to my master here, tell me. If not, tell me, so that I may know whether to turn to the right or to the left. Can I have someone read their response? I think in this case we can be kinder to them. And certainly, yes, he would have left his gold with them. But even with a high bridal price, to send your daughter off to a faraway land with this stranger is an act of faith. And the servant waits a whopping 12 hours before setting off. He gets up the next morning and says, is it time to go now? And they ask for her to stay, which I understand perfectly. At least give us 10 days to say goodbye, they say. And he said, please, Abraham's ancient. He could die at any moment. Let me go back And they say, well, we'll ask her, and she gives them permission to go. And they travel. And I'm going to start at verse 62. Isaac had come from the direction of Bir Lahoi Roy. I don't know what that means. For he was living in the Negev. In the evening, Isaac had gone out to the field to meditate. He looked up and saw that there were camels coming. Rebekah also looked up, and when she saw Isaac, she jumped down from the camel. She said to the servant, "Who is that man who is walking through the field to meet us?" The servant answered, "It is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac everything he had done. Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took her as a wife. He loved her. Isaac stopped mourning for his mother's death. If we were writing a modern story, what might we say? Finish it. And they lived happily ever after. Things stand out to you in the way this concludes. I'd like to finish. Does seem a little like it. And yet, in our modern world, would we see this as a fairy tale? If you were to make a movie of Isaac and Rebekah and their love story, would it have a happy ending, do you think, if modern audiences were to write the story? Have to. Oh, the 10 days of time to say goodbye, and I don't know if they would have tried to expand that. I mean, we do have Laban's example later on about him changing the arrangements frequently, but I think we can take that in its kindest possible way and just say, you're saying goodbye to your daughter and sister. Saying it at goodbye after 12 hours is quite sudden. I don't know, I get it. As someone who just sent his daughter away as someone who just sent his daughter away to school, I get it. The longer time I could have, the better. I'm going to ask this final question. What does this teach us about the foundation of marriage? Certainly true. He can, yes, according to his own purposes, but we often, when we interfere, we can have a way of making things more difficult for ourselves. Is a happy marriage built primarily on the feelings of love that two people? Now we have that Isaac loved her. I'm not saying love is that the primary thing on which this marriage is built. I think primarily it's built on the commitment that will not be broken. So without that commitment, to build a life together, there is no trust. There is no patience. There is no deeper love that grows through time, but only the fleeting attraction and affection that comes and goes. So, I just think we have to be careful. It's not saying, well, we should just arrange marriages then. That's the lesson. Let's just go kidnap women from faraway lands and take them back to live here, and that's the way marriages should be done. That's not. However, just because we do marriage where we let the children decide that they will pick somebody that they love does not necessarily mean that that's a God-ordained method of finding a godly spouse. When we raise our children, and when we guide our grandchildren, reminding them to keep the main thing when they do go through the process of seeking a wife or a husband. But the key is to find the person you will commit to build a life together. I think we can take that from this. And that's where we have to stop.